Okay, so for those who are joining us, I am Dr. Chloe Farahar of Aucademy, and if you haven't been to Aucademy before, we are autistic educators of autistic experience. So everything we do on Aucademy is about autistic experiences of all descriptions, and we only use educators of any background who are autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. So today I am joined by Jane Green, who is an educationalist and advocates for a number of causes, but today we'll be focusing on Ehlers Danlos Syndrome and hypermobility syndromes. And Jane recently actually spoke at our autistic pregnancy and childbearing event on hypermobility and issues with our tissues when people who are autistic are pregnant. So hello, Jane.
Hello.
And Jane's got a presentation, so I'm going to disappear, but I will still be here, Jane, just so you know. And then you can share your screen and start your presentation.
Thank you. Ehlers Danlos Syndromes and hypermobility spectrum disorders. And why does that matter to me? So hopefully you will see some things that are, well, I've never thought about that, and gosh, I do that. So hopefully this will help. I am not a medical practitioner, and so I'm just going to say that I'm an educationalist. So anything here, if you're worried about it, you should go to your medical practitioner. I studied psychology undergraduate degree quite late in my 40s after having my children. I had to study psychology as my motivation was to help others, help other autistic children, as my eldest did not receive the best or even any support that was needed generally. I felt that this was needed and that teachers needed that support, as did the children and their families, instead of being blamed as a bad parent. So that is why I studied psychology. I wanted to be an educational psychologist. Despite leaving school early and being labelled dim, I had many obstacles to overcome. And after doing my first degree, I had to train as a qualified teacher, do a teaching degree with QTS, and subsequent application for the EdSci, which that year changed to the doctorate in London. I did receive an invitation, but I had to decline due to my poor health. Despite this, I received awards and went on to study and work at autistic epilepsy research schools, doing my advanced diploma in education child development and my master's on organisational transformation, autism focus in mainstream schools. By that time, I was working as advisory autism teacher for the County Council, then lead for the largest autism charity in education nationally, and was on the steering group designing the school autism social model of education and leading that out in the southeast. I became an assistant head teacher, successfully trained many people in this model and mentored other autistic young adults. I was involved in national autism consultancy work and employment issues. During all this time, I kept being aware of the extreme hypermobility issues that all the pupils I came across in all phases and areas of school seemed to have, difficulties with coordination, with pressure, senses, and so on. I was also obviously aware of this with my eldest son and with myself, although I was told I couldn't be on the spectrum as I was a professional. So unfortunately, I'd had years of injuries and illness, but disbelief, and this is why I had to retire early and then received my extremely late diagnosis of both conditions. And this is why I am here now, motivated to help others in this situation. I do not want them in the future generation to go through what I've gone through, and so advocate for them and in the public domain. So, Ehlers Danlos syndromes are heritable, and there are about 14 different types. There were 13, it's just 14 now, and 4 of hypermobility spectrum disorder. All Ehlers Danlos syndromes can be genetically tested. The most common type is hypermobility Ehlers Danlos syndromes, HEDS for short, and unfortunately there's no test for that. It is a heritable multisystemic connective tissue disorder, and connective tissues are found throughout our body. The history is quite interesting. According to various researchers, Ehlers Danlos Syndromes was first noticed by Hippocrates in 400 BC. A group of nomads had very lax joints and multiple scars. Their flabbiness and wounds meant they were unable to use their weapons in warfare. So the laxity, they had hyperlaxity of the elbow and shoulder joints, and it prevented them from drawing their bows effectively, in and out. Later on, well, 2,000 years have passed, and Chernogorov also mentions patients with dislocations and hyperextensible skin in 1892. Clinical features suggestive of hypermobility syndrome are also illustrated in the painting The Three Graces by Peter Paul, mentioned in other key researchers' work, Dr. Eccles. And Eugene Delacroix actually painted the famous violinist Paganini, and he was described as being the rubber man, as was very tall, thin, with very long, thin fingers, and flailed about on stage. And they think due to his very long fingers and span reach of his hand, which allowed him to play 3 octaves in one hand, possibly this was due to Marfan syndrome, which is linked to Ehlers Danlos syndromes. Now, I'm always wary of labeling people when they're no longer around or haven't disclosed anything. So that is just a view. So the most common type, hypermobility Ehlers Danlos syndromes. In 2017, there were changes to how Ehlers Danlos syndromes were diagnosed. Previous diagnoses given to patients might have been bendy very often, or joint hypermobility syndrome, or benign JHS. And the benign bit just meant you weren't an imminent, there wasn't a progressive prognosis of death with this. And also there was another diagnosis of EDS3. So for HEDS, as I said before, there's no actual test for it. It has to be done by clinical assessment and the signs of defective connective tissue throughout the body. So they look for skin features, skin extensibility, pain, hernias, prolapses, also a family history of the condition, and musculoskeletal problems like long-term pain and dislocations with the joints. So on here, and a lot of charities have it as well, the EDS Society have the criteria for the hypermobility Ehlers Danlos syndromes, and so does the EDS RCGP EDS toolkit. So you can find them quite a lot of places. There are many associated symptoms and disorders which don't form part of the formal criteria and which do not directly result from joint hypermobility, like postural tachycardia, digestive orders, gastrointestinal issues, pelvic and bladder dysfunction, and anxiety disorders. And they can all be equally as detrimental to quality of life as joint syndromes. But that is not to say joint hypermobility is not debilitating, because it can be. And in fact, it can be life-limiting in some rarer cases. So joint hypermobility with its possible complications is now classified using the idea of a spectrum. And there are 4 subtypes of hypermobility spectrum disorder, depending where the hypermobility is generalized and which parts. But I would say, and I think a lot of people would say, they're very, very closely related. And so management advice for both hypermobility EDS and HSD is the same. I've mentioned connective tissue a little bit. Both Ehlers Danlos syndromes and hypermobility spectrum disorder are complex connective tissue disorders. Connective tissues are found throughout our body in specialized areas like joints, cartilage, muscles, general areas such as the myofascial tissues, adipose tissue, muscles, nerves in the nervous system, bones, blood, vessels, and basically it's found throughout the body. It helps attach and stabilize muscles and internal organs. And it's a major constituent to skin and bones and blood vessels, tendons and ligaments. It surrounds our cells and actually is found inside the matrix of our cells. So connective tissue gives strength and form to each individual cell and allows them to function. It has also now been found to affect the cardiovascular autonomic system, the gastrointestinal system, and mast cells, which I'll show and talk about later. Alteration in the collagen gene can result in the body producing connective tissue, which is abnormal. So the collagen fibers or building blocks of the collagen lack stiffness and strength, and they're too elastic or break or tear easily. This comes, all my references will be in the at the back of the page. This thing, so the Smith book is very good, and the more I read it, I realize how good it is. It is often quoted, and I am not immune to saying it, connective tissue is the equivalent of building a house with cement holding the bricks and so on together. If mixed in the right quantities, the house is stable. But if some of the cement is in the wrong quantities with different mixtures all mixed up and used in parts of it there and parts of it in a different area, you will have a very wonky house. Bits won't hold up as well as others. And if the main structure isn't right, what happens inside the house, i.e. electrics and waterworks? There is another type. There are 14 types, but the next most common type would be vascular Ehlers Danlos syndrome, or VEDS. And this is a rare disorder, unlike possibly HEDS might be in the future. It's estimated to affect 1 in 50,000 and 1 in 200,000 people. It's caused by a gene mutation affecting a major protein, which causes weakness in vessel walls and hollow organs. Is characterized by aneurysms like a bulge in the artery, a rupture of the bowel, and can be a rupture of the womb during pregnancy. So managing and monitoring the condition improves the outlook and requires specialists from different disciplines. So the gene is known for this. There is a test, and so it can be tested for, and you do have a care diagnostic pathway. This is unlike hypermobility, Ehlers Danlos syndrome, or hypermobility spectrum disorder, where it's just done on clinical assessment and therefore harder to diagnose. So now we're going to look at some common symptoms and conditions that we found are very, very common with all the people that we meet. Crazy today. So our defective connective tissue means our tissues are weaker and more lax and elastic. Due to this, we are less likely to be able to keep our joints within a stable range, and extra muscular effort is required before it's moved. Sometimes our joint sockets are not formed right, they're very shallow, so that also exacerbates movements sideways, laterally, wherever. And subluxations or full dislocations of the joint can occur. Even if there's no dislocation or subluxation, we're more likely to tear fibers in the muscles. So microtears are also quite common. I must just explain, we use this language all the time. So a subluxation is like a partial dislocation. It's not fully out. We get very used to these words quite quickly. So possibly due to our lax connective tissue, our muscles are working doubly hard, maybe more, just to keep us upright altogether. And this can cause rigidity and muscle spasms. So often we're advised to stretch the muscles out. Now, while stretching and deep massage is lovely and feels good at the time, it can be very temporary. In fact, what you have to do is the opposite sometimes, actually strengthen your muscles in the right way. You might need a specialist one-to-one for that. And that way the muscle can actually learn to relax. Ligaments attached to the muscles can't do the whole job, so sometimes the muscles completely just tense up and tear or rupture. So pain and discomfort is just a part of our everyday experience. We also get sprains which take much longer to heal, often than a broken bone, which tends to happen less frequently. Once sprained, it is quite common for our whatever part has sprained to never fully recover, and it sprains with more frequency and needs extra support if left untreated, things like splints and braces. Tendinitis and tendon rupture sometimes can take up to 28 months recovery in some people's cases because the management wasn't there. Of course, better management, knowledge and belief now would alleviate that length of time. You can also get tendinopathy. Other symptoms are things like plantar fasciitis, quite common, and metalgesia. We often don't sit or stand in the correct posture, as it is hard work. It is easier to sit, if you're a child or you see them in school, in the W position. Or when standing, hypermobile people will often tend to hyperextend their knees, so you look out the knees. And it used to be called double jointed when I was a child. And it does feel more comfortable and easier to do that, but obviously it shouldn't be ever recommended. We often have to sit in weird positions to get comfortable with one leg crossed right under the other. And sometimes we really like to stretch to the end of movement because it just feels nice, but ideally we should restrain from that. Another issue with musculoskeletal things are bursitis. And although it's not on there, it's a big issue for what seems a very, very small tissue. It is a small fluid-filled tissue, a bit like a small balloon, and it protects the joints. But as the joints are hypermobile, the bursitis can have a very hard job and it gets inflamed because it's doing so much work. In the hip area, this is now called greater trochanteric pain and can be very severe, and it feels like day in and day out burning pain, and you can't put any pressure on it or lie on it. Neuropathy is a pain symptom of the nerve fibers, and also myofascial pain of fascia is incredibly sensitive. And due to inflammation, this can flare. So some of the other symptoms are chronic fatigue and ME. A lot of people suffering with Ehlers Danlos and hypermobility spectrum disorder have previous diagnoses of chronic fatigue syndrome or ME, type, as I said, or just tired and they don't have a diagnosis. But when I say tired, I'll explain a bit more. It doesn't get better after a night's sleep. It varies in severity and flares. I try to describe it as a weight of heaviness. You can't even open your eyelids, and it can last for a considerable amount of time. Some possible reasons for fatigue are due to our lax connective tissue. Our muscles are working doubly hard, maybe just to keep us upright, as explained before. The ligaments attached to the muscles can't do the whole job, so the muscles completely tense up. Due to the overuse of this, it becomes very tiring for the body, and this might be why we develop the fatigue. Postural tachycardia syndrome occurs in about 70 to 78% of Ehlers Danlos people. Some don't have a diagnosis of POTS, but have something called dysautonomia, which we'll talk about later, and inadequate blood flow. So less oxygen delivery to the brain could be a contributor to brain fog and tiredness. For some, it could also be trauma from viral issues, or hormones started after puberty, or trauma like an accident or other viral infection. And that's the Jovan book. Non-restorative sleep, again, this might be due to dysautonomia. Hormonal dysfunction can be symptoms of hypothyroidism despite having a normal thyroid function test. And also other factors could be things like cerebral spinal fluid leaks, intracranial pressure, causes intense pressure in the brain, causing pain, and the pain along with tinnitus, which is also goes along with that, can often limit sleep and causes intense fatigue. And of course, medication can also affect sleep. So there are quite a lot of things there. Now, in my years of experience of working with my eldest child, who's not far off 30, many other children in autistic special schools, epilepsy schools, and mainstream schools, in the ones I came across, seem to have all similar issues. And I used to talk about it in my work with multidisciplinary teams. I mentioned hypermobility and had they noticed, and the lack of muscle tone. I also noticed that with my eldest as well, coordination issues with eating, swallowing, pain in stomach, extreme allergies in our family, anaphylaxis, direct IgE mediated foods, and other allergies such as asthma, eczema, and hay fever. Eyesight was also affected. I wasn't quite sure. It'd been a difficult labour and wasn't the best result. So I wasn't sure if it was due to that trauma. But my youngest son also had extreme allergies. Anyway, going back to the multidisciplinary team, they hadn't noticed, and actually they weren't that interested because they had a set way of doing it. And in all the training I've always developed, it was always other things put in, and hypermobility was not mentioned. So I hope this will, and the work I'm doing with national charities will get this more in the open. So I've mentioned allergies a little bit, and unfortunately it's very, very common. So you can get direct IgE mediated food allergies, so they can be tested with skin pricks or blood tests, and the reaction usually happens straight away. It's not delayed. And the most common direct food allergies are peanuts, soy, wheat, tree nuts, shellfish, fish, raw fruits, veg, and sesame seeds. So the symptoms, either way, if they're IgE mediated or not, usually are tingling or itching in the mouth, hives, which I've got a picture of later, itching, eczema, swelling of the lips, face, tongue, throat, so you can't actually breathe, wheezing, nasal congestion or trouble breathing. When I say nasal congestion, your actually eyes and nose can be streaming. Abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. And the vomiting can be projectile. Dizziness, lightheadedness, and or fainting. So there's quite a lot going on there, and the allergies vary. They can come and go. They seem to flare. One of them, the hives, is just a symptom, but the pollen is quite key, and it varies, and also dust mites are key, and mold, particularly coming up to late autumn now. That will come more people with Ehlers Danlos Syndromes will have more symptoms. And dander is cats mainly, or dogs. It can become very allergic to them. So I'm going to talk about other allergies, the ones that we can't test directly with the skin prick. And this is called mast cell activation disorder, or MCAS as well, which system. So I'm going to abbreviate it to MCAS. Mast cells are a type of blood cell, and they play a really important role in our body's immune system. Fortunately, a lot of hypermobile people have a very poor immune system. So the mast cells reside in all the body tissues and form part of the body's initial defense system. So if there's a foreign body or injury in the body, the mast cells release potent chemical mediators such as histamine, and they flood the body with this. and it's there to act beneficially to protect and heal the body in a healthy person. But in a person with MCAS, these same chemicals are inappropriately triggered, and when released have a negative effect on the body. Amongst these triggers are foods, as I mentioned before, but also, strangely, exercise, chemicals, fragrances, and stress. So many sufferers struggle to identify their triggers and continue to discover new triggers for many years, and they add on. There's also another different disease called mastocytosis, and that is quite different. It's a protein multi-system disease. So if you want more information on that, the books and references are at the back. It's quite a new disease. It was found in 2007. So at the moment, it's all about management. You often need a range of drugs to lessen the overreaction, and careful management, and keeping a diary is really, really key. And there's a lovely charity called Muscle Action, which can help as well. And they call it MCAS Hides in Plain Sight, which I quite like. We know that autistic people can get quite anxious in a variety of ways. Unknown people, location, time schedules, tech, me. And often autistic people find it easier to navigate by having understanding of the systems and processes involved. This can often evolve into a deep passion that might pass in a few weeks, months, or stay for years, and I call it deep dive. When I was training, our interests used to be called obsessions and used in quite a derogatory manner. I always felt, and still do, our interests are key to our motivation. It becomes amazing things, and must never be underestimated. By working everything out, it can help lessen our anxiety, and it's also interesting for us. But either way, so for example, going to hospital, having things explained to us is key. And sometimes we can become a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. It is the unknown and suspense that can be the key of anxiety, and of course other people and social. Now, people with hypermobility syndrome are overrepresented with anxiety, and some key research has associated this with abnormal autonomic nervous system reactivity. So people with joint hypermobility are 16 times more likely to have panic or anxiety disorders. Hypermobility is also linked to other disorders like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, ME, and irritable bowel syndrome. So the study there will be back in the references. The last one was by Dr. Eck. So next, we're going to look at dysautonomia and postural tachycardia syndrome, and I'll explain why. Dysautonomia is used to describe the autonomic nervous system not working correctly. So lots of people can get issues with dysautonomia, not just SEDS, but there is a particular area where this is more apparent. So the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, does its business usually without us having to consciously think about it, like breathing, heartbeats, and digestion, bladder control. It is divided into 3 subsystems. The first one is a sympathetic, it's not number one, it's just one. Sympathetic nerve system does the blood pressure, the heart rate, and responsible for our fight or flight responses. So in response to any perceived threat, it has that response for the body. When, for example, we're faced with a possible life-threatening situation, it may or may not be actually life-threatening, we get increased adrenaline to deal with the threat. So this was very useful, and still is, obviously. If you're faced with, used to be a tiger round the corner, you would do your fight or flight. So your muscles will be pumped with blood, ready to do either or. For me, it's black, hairy, muscly spiders. At the moment, I know it's just a bush, and I fly. Anyway, if I can move. So it also, the sympathetic system also deals with low or high blood pressure. It increases the heart rate and the breathing and so on. So if the sympathetic nervous system overloads or over-responds and compensates too much with this added adrenaline, this can lead to fluctuations in the heart rate and blood pressure, as well as the breathing and gastrointestinal issues. Sometimes this happens at night, and you get palpitations, and it feels like your heart is jumping out of your body. And also sometimes the sympathetic nerves can cause constriction of blood vessels to non-essential parts of the body, as in Raynaud's, so your fingers or feet get very, very cold. Nighttime racy heart feels like palpitations, and in various ways can affect your sleep. Sympathetic nerves can also cause constriction of blood vessels to non-essential part of the body, as in Raynaud's. So this is called secondary Raynaud's phenomenon, and all your fingers will go blue very quickly, or your feet and hands and toes. The interesting part here is that the sympathetic nervous system can mimic symptoms of anxiety that are an anxiety disorder, so it's actually physical. One of the triggers I mentioned before is stress, which can lead to heart and blood pressure. For me now, I can feel it when it is happening, I can hear it, and I can feel it. I've had training. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do about it. I just happen to know it's happening. So perhaps it lessens the extreme reactions I've had in the past. It's unknown. Management of physical anxiety needs a different approach than that of other anxiety. So CBT or counselling might not work in this case. Another system is the parasympathetic nervous system. It deals with rest and digest, and the vagus nerve is part of this. It releases a special chemical, and in response to fluctuations in the heart rate of the sympathetic system, it might or might not be able to do this. Sometimes it doesn't do this. So there are various things going on here. As I said, I'm not medical. Another subset of dysautonomia is postural tachycardia syndrome. You can again look at the charity POTS UK for more information. POTS predominantly affects females, mainly between 50 and 50 years. So women with hypermobility Ehlers Danlos syndromes often also experience postural tachycardia syndrome, and that's about 78% of PEDS people. The main symptoms occur when the person is standing upright, so it's easier to lie flat or sit down, hence the diagram. Common symptoms are dizziness, weakness, lightheadedness, fainting, palpitations, breathlessness, shaking, fatigue, sleep issues, migraine headaches, nausea, Raynaud's phenomenon, nausea, vision, weakness, brain fog, bowel issues, kidney issues, and even low plasma issues. So hormonal changes because of those years might be part of the issue, and there are studies looking at the different hormones that occur, and in my experience and those around us, we find the most common factors are it started, children can suffer from all this, no doubt about it, but it seems to get worse at puberty, pregnancy and menopause. Pain be acute, and this would be something like a dislocation, a ruptured tendon, a sprain. So pain is for a specific time span usually and due to an injury. With painkillers, the pain should be muted. Persistent chronic pain takes a long time to gradually build up, but is more harmful in a way. Then you have neuropathic pain, and this could be an injury or possible malfunction to the nervous system, and that's like a sharp, stabbing, burning pain, and this happens in neuralgia as well. And then you have myofascial pain, which is often caused by injury to joints and sprains and the soft tissues surrounding and all the different areas. So there are many different types. There's even more complex regional pain is a comorbidity with people with hypermobility. Osteoarthritis is very common. We think it's because there's so many injuries, musculoskeletal wise. Osteoarthritis is kind of determined, and therefore you will be in pain. Over the years, I've been to many doctors and hospitals, and they give you the pain chart, or even physio medical practitioners, and you're given the pain chart. Where are you on the tick box? This is the basic one on the screen, from 1 to 10. And I found it extremely difficult to identify where I am on the pain, because number one, I'm in pain all the time. I don't like to think about it, but I am in pain all the time. Sometimes it's very acute, sometimes they're different parts acute at the same time, which makes it all very complicated. Plus the fact I'm a bit stressed usually by that time. And when I'm stressed, I can't talk. I go a bit mute and I go blank. Happened the other day. So I never know whether to say 10 or 1, but I like to say something. So I guess what they want to hear, and that's not the right thing to do. And often I just don't want to be there. So I might say less, and that is something I have to work on. But I think also when you're in pain and you have double joints or other issues or stomach issues in pain, sometimes if you're autistic as well, we often think the other person must know for some reason, maybe theory of mind personally for us. And that is difficult. So I think it should always be borne in mind, never mind what profession you're in, how expressive you can be. For autistic people, this needs to be understood. Senses. So there are different senses, as you know. The most common ones when I was training, obviously, well, growing up, are the 5 senses. And then we, as a trained, we had 2 more: proprioception, which is like the cat's whiskers. Any chance to put my cat in the picture helps me. Without whiskers, the cat is at a serious disadvantage to gauging where they are and where objects are in relation to them. When I was training delegates, I used to use the pointy finger exercise, and you close your eyes and look at a point on the ceiling. And weirdly, when I regularly damage my shoulders, I have to do that exercise as well. I find it quite interesting. So we've got those 5 senses, then the proprioception. We also have vestibular, which helps us to maintain balance and know where we are in relation to the space around us. And if you think about the astronauts when they, sorry about the picture, when they return to Earth, they're carried out of the space shuttle by people because they can't be horizontal or vertical. They don't have the vestibular sense, is dysfunctional at that point. So those are the 7 senses, and that's what we trained with. And it's very important to know about that. Other people with symptomatic hypermobility syndromes might have problems with proprioceptive dysfunction, and this affects how much pressure they use when gripping objects, such as pencils and pens, how to walk straight through a doorway. that's in the Smith book. So while understanding these bodily feelings can help with interpretation of what's going on inside the body, it's more difficult with symptomatic hypermobility people because the brain is behaving differently to other people. And this is, I'm doing some work with in education, advising, and if the pupils have co-occurring conditions such as autism, then this can be further confusing, as recognizing the emotions and sensations are like a double whammy or double jeopardy, I like to say. If this picture isn't clear, I'm quite happy to pass it on to you later. The last sense is interoception, and it refers to physical health and the mental health and emotional functioning. This is by Quat, Gray, Critchley and Garfinkel. Our organs, including skin, muscles and joints, have receptors throughout our body. They sense and collect information from the body to the brain about helping to regulate vital functions such as hunger, pain, thirst, digestion, and or heart rate. It also helps with the sensing of external homeostatic regulations such as temperature, itch, pain, or pleasure. So a study by Dr. Eckel showed that hypermobility influences the autonomic nervous system, and that in turn affects the interoception sense. So interoception sense refers to the sensing of the internal state of the body and how it relates to specific physical and mental health conditions. So the receptors are in, as I said, your skin, your organs, and they send those vital messages. And what I found is, and particularly with my eldest, you don't realize you're injured or in pain until it's really obvious. And then suddenly it's like 100%. They've got the autonomic nervous system, but it interacts with the interoception sense. Some people are in a state of fight or flight, but they might be in that state of fight or flight a lot of the time, and they become hypervigilant to sensations, injury or pain. Along this, people with POTS seem to be more sensitive to the chemical there, not that one, sorry, noradrenaline or norepinephrine, which causes symptoms like anxiety. In addition, the parasympathetic nervous system responsible for our relaxed response may not be functioning normally. So symptoms of anxiety are further exacerbated. And the thing to think about with interoception is that we don't know when we're hungry. We can't sense it always. We don't know when we're in pain until it's too much. We might forget to eat. And a lot of these issues are issues that autistic people have as well. So that's interesting. Other issues. It is not uncommon for those with hypermobility syndromes to have a poor response to anesthesia, like lignocaine. Very often, there's an increased incidence of non-effect, and including those with epidurals. Additionally, increased incidence of gaining venous access due to our connective tissue. So our veins might look nice, but they actually collapse or wriggle away due to being so stretchy. They just seem to move around, and the poor nurse is struggling. So not everybody, and I must say this throughout everything, everybody has different traits of hypermobility if they're diagnosed, different sort of pathways. So not everybody has everything, and not everybody with Ehlers Danlos Syndromes hypermobility spectrum disorder are autistic, and vice versa. That's not the case, but there are quite a lot of people who are. Other issues are temporomandibular joint dysfunction, and it's one of the most complicated joints. So it affects about 70% of hypermobility people, and it's very hard to manage, and I have deep sympathy for those who have that. Dysphonia is physical disorder of the mouth, tongue, and vocal cords, about 38% of hypermobile people. It also affects our teeth. If you've ever had a root canal and you're hypermobile, they might say you're very, very difficult patient to do because our roots are wonky as well, which is quite interesting. We also are prone to gum disease. Tooth enamel can be quite poor. And if you have braces as a teenager and they take them off, the dentist can often, or orthodontist can be surprised that the teeth have moved back and they haven't stayed. And that's because, like our bones, we can be manipulated quite easily, but we don't stay. Dry eyes are very common. It might be due to the medications we're taking or a problem with the tear film that keeps us lubricated. And the symptoms of that are like irritation, burning grit, and bright lights. So there's an awful lot of things there. It doesn't mean you're going to have them all if you're hypermobile, just people vary so much. Maintaining a healthy diet is very important. Registered dietitians recommend eating a varied diet if allergies allow, and that's very key. And if they don't, and a lot of people have very severe gastrointestinal or GERD issues, and I won't even go into that too far today, that's for specialists to talk about. But otherwise, just eat regular small amounts of meals. Do not let your blood sugar drop. Generally, vegan diets are not recommended for us. And obviously, if you're pregnant, you will get healthy, good food advice. It's also important to eat fiber for constipation if you are able to, and that would be because often we can get constipation. And very important to drink. Again, due to interoception sense, we might not realize that we're thirsty, and that can also be a factor. So it again is that double factor of worry. Other symptoms, I talked on it lightly before: headaches, regular headaches, hormonal changes can cause it. Tinnitus can be caused because of the instability of the bones in the middle of the ear again. Also, hormones like progesterone may exacerbate this condition. So you would see a specialist for that. Sleep can be adversely affected. Painful joints, tinnitus, palpitations, poor thermoregulation, and also allergies. You could often come up at night as well. So taking simple remedies can often help. Not always. So as I said, I'm not going into gastrointestinal issues too much to do it justice, but Professor Rodney Graham, who I've never met, but I've heard about him for a long time. I've termed him, he doesn't know, the godfather of SEDS, says that some people might have a dysfunction of the bowel due to oversensitivity or MCAS that are associated with pain and the autonomic nervous system dysfunction in the brain and heart. Another symptom very often found even in children is stretch marks, and they're very common. They can occur out of the blue on the outer thigh, stomach, and even the back or upper back. But it is, I've kept that one in there from my pregnancy talk because it's very important to realize that if you do have stretch marks on the abdomen, it doesn't mean you've had a previous pregnancy. I want to talk about gender bias, and I did that a bit about the autism and my key talk at the beginning about not being believed. I think delays in diagnosis and pain differences are quite key in women. Research data decisions are often based on men's data and design and using male mice. I know that even from accessibility issues in autism, it's always been based on men's perspective. Ehlers Danlos Hypermobility spectrum disorder has the longest diagnostic delay among the rare disease reviewed. So being alert to hypermobility, gender bias, spectrum autism bias, and gender differences are key. Also, according to Jovan, the odds of having severe pain increases with diagnostic delay. So in my case, I was called double jointed, bendy. We all get aches and pains at my age, even though I clearly demonstrated dislocated ankles, which are, I was told, not possible, and knees. By the time I got to see a scope, physio or medical practitioner, I was disbelieved. Also, all the other things, being allergic, gastrointestinal issues, the tight muscles, fibromyalgia, all add up to that pain. So finally, this isn't my saying. I don't think anyone actually knows. So again, we're all using it. If you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. Thank you.
I have notes and questions whilst I was listening. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to jump in because I've got a comment, another big comment, and a potential question. I'm just going to, do you want to keep sharing or shall I stop the sharing?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know, whatever you want, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to stop the sharing so that we can both be on the screen.
So
there we go. No, I've done it. We're here.
Oh, you've done it, right.
Yeah, lovely. So I found it quite interesting to hear about the links and other potential experiences with EDS and hypermobility, such as allergy and anxiety, like things you wouldn't, you do tend to just think of it as the bendy diagnosis. So there's a lot of things there. And then, so I'm going to go through something in a second, but one of my questions, which I don't know if it's a silly question or not, but it's something that I've heard before, which is about the theory that the higher rates of EDS, and so potentially collagen differences, if I'm saying that correctly, then after, I'm hoping I'm listening properly, might explain why many of us in the autistic community don't look our ages. Have you heard of this theory? Yes. Is there any validity to this idea?
Yes, very, very common actually. So if you think of the connective tissue, it's a really lovely question actually. I love this one. And it's got a double edge. So I'm just thinking about the other edge of how I'm going to answer this. Our collagen, so some of our skin is, depending what type of subset of Ehlers Danlos syndrome you have, some skin is very thin and fragile and wounds very quickly. Some skin is very thick and smooth, and I never bruise, for example, but I still got extensibility on the test. Very, very, it's like dough. So therefore, I'm not very prone to getting lines, which always annoyed me, because I always wanted characterful, but I always wanted characterful lines, and I just couldn't get them. I'm getting them now, so that's fine. But it's very common, and I noticed again with autistic pupils, we've always got that blank sort of face quite often, haven't we?
Yeah, I have to work quite hard. I don't think I have any form of Ehlers Danlos or hypermobility, but I'm going to go through something in a minute, which is a checklist of things that I was like, I have all of these things.
I'm not medical.
I know that, and I really appreciate that. And again, to be clear for people watching, both Jane and I are not clinicians of any description. So anything that you're interested in and you're picking up on, yes, go to your GP, for instance. But yes, it was interesting just because of the very vast number of things that are connected to this that I wouldn't have necessarily considered was quite interesting. But let's stick with the collagen and faces for a minute. So like I said, I don't think, because I'm not hypermobile and things, but we'll have a discussion about that in a second. But yeah, I have to work, whether that's just because I'm autistic, but I have to work quite hard to remind my face to do things. So when I typically do these interviews, or just know that I can see myself on Zoom when I'm talking to somebody, I realize how neutral my face is the majority of the time. And Zoom has made that worse, because before that I wouldn't have been thinking about it. I would have just been listening to the person and not really caring about my facial expression. But yeah, so it's quite interesting, because I have to sort of remind myself, right, I'm interested, make sure the person can see it on your face.
I think it is quite hard. So I remember as a teenager, people would say things, oh, smile, you've got such a lovely smile. And
yeah, rude.
I don't want to. Why should I? You know, why? Don't ever tell me what to do, please. B, it's actually quite hard. I think there's something there. You've touched on something. I think it's quite hard, actually.
And I always notice that my smile doesn't, like in my natural smile, when I'm genuinely happy and trying to smile, it doesn't go up. It does this weird, it always frustrates me. It is like it's hard to describe. Like most of my mouth is going up, but then it kind of goes down at this. I can't really describe it very well. But yeah, so things like this I've noticed. And my partner, so I'm 36 and my partner's 43, and he always stares at my face and goes, where are the wrinkles? Like, seriously, where? There's not one. And I've always been mistaken for being considerably younger than I am. And I can't decide if it might be a mixture of things. It might be I'm potentially quite squeaky when I speak, and I dress with relatively young, I guess, but like I wear dresses and things like that. And so I think there's a number of things that plays into the.
I think I mean, I can't tell. I think you've got lovely skin. So we can generally see, we've got this radar for EDSTAR. You can sort of see the skin. I'm not saying you are at all. I can't.
I know you're not an English. I know we're very tentative.
And I know what you mean. I mean, it's very, very common that a lot of us do not. I mean, I was bowled over by a lady the other day in my group who's actually, I think she said the same age as you, and then she looks about 16. And I've had the same to me. In fact, some women get very annoyed. So I don't disclose my age now. And it's not because I'm vain or hiding it. It's because if I say my age, they get cross. And if I don't, then I'm lying, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not doing it. So I just don't.
I mean, at my so after I did my Viva for my PhD, you tend to go for meals with your supervisor and your examiners and things like that. And I had a small number of people that I got on with, and I remember one of my peers asking me to remind herself how old I was. She'd asked me before. She'd been shocked the first time. She was still shocked that time, and sort of announced it to the table. And my examiners were like, "You're how old? We should have been harder on you." Like, because and I know it was a joke. I hope it was a joke, but they assumed I was much younger, and that maybe they should have potentially been given me a harder time with my Viva and things like this. So that was quite amusing.
It's quite interesting. Sometimes though, I know a lot of people have a go at me, and I'm not aware of it. So I don't know whether I must pull faces at times when people are saying the weirdest things, but I'm not aware of it. And they say, "Why are you doing that face?" And it's like, "Am I? What am I doing? I need to look."
Yeah, it's like my face.
And also, I have that thing where you don't recognise yourself. Is it prosopagnosia?
Prosopagnosia, yeah.
I do now because I see myself quite a lot, but I don't. It takes a while for me to realise that person I know.
that's you, yeah. So I'm going to list my things that I've, as I was listening, and again reiterating, there's no diagnosis or anything going on here. So I was just listing some of the things that while I was listening. So I have got slight scoliosis, although I was told that was an X-ray that was done by a chiropractor. So I don't know how valid that would be. I'd have to get it done by the NHS. If it was maybe an osteopath, I might have had a little bit more say.
Osteopaths are good.
Yeah, but this was a chiropractor, so I paid for them to do an X-ray for me because I used to have extreme back problems where I couldn't stand up straight at times, and literally would have to get the partner I had at the time to walk me around the block to be able to loosen the base of my spine so I could actually stand upright again. So it used to get quite bad. I've sort of taught myself to be better with.
Sorry.
That's all right. I haven't had as bad a time of it with my back as that, because I tried to teach myself, to sit better and this kind of thing. But for me, the biggest thing is I'm incredibly rigid and have no mobility whatsoever. And I remember when I was having really bad back problems, the NHS, I did some NHS physiotherapy, and the guy was saying I had very short tendons, or basically I was really he was having a really hard time because I was so stiff. So
the rigidity and spasms are very, very common. People think hypermobility means you've got to be all flexible like a gymnast, and that's good to be a gymnast or ballerina, but the best ones are ones that train it, don't have it naturally, because it can be weak. But yeah, the rigidity and spasms, as in multiple sclerosis, is very, very common and is debilitating. And if the collagen is weak because it's black and elastic throughout our body, the tendons and muscles and ligaments are trying to do a better job than they can. So you're going to get those really tight bits and those really floppy bits. Scoliosis is quite common as well.
Okay, I'm going to carry on with my list then. My jaw's always kind of clicked, not popped out per se, but I go like, yeah. So I have issues with that, but it's very, very rarely now, but yeah, it kind of pops out sometimes.
Temporal mandibular TMJ, I call it, or TMD, it's very severe, is again very common. My eldest has the TMJ. It doesn't cause a big issue. I have it very not severe, but for a lot of people it's dislocating the jaw. It clicks, you can't put it back.
And yeah, mine does. It kind of does click. It does go back in.
Yeah,
but it doesn't pop out and stay stuck out.
So that's very common.
Okay. What exactly does poor muscle tone mean? Because I think I've been told that I have poor muscle tone. We used to joke in my old employment, which I never name because it's a big brand chain. And I remember my boss calling me noodle arms because of my difficulty trying to pick things up. And like I used to get other team members to help me lift a lot of the crates and things. And I remember going to try and, because my physiotherapist had said, try to go to a good Pilates class to strengthen the muscles because of the issues I was having with my back. And I remember going to this, what was supposed to be a Pilates class, and it was awful. It was, this woman was basically getting us to do things like push-ups and things like this. And I was like, this is not Pilates. And I couldn't, there were like people who were considerably older than me who were able to do like the push-ups and stuff like that. I could barely do one. And the woman came over with a microphone on, because, they sometimes do that in gyms, going, why have you stopped? And I went, because my arms are too weak to actually hold myself up and do this. And she laughed at me and made really embarrassed me in front of this big class, but I couldn't do it. And so I complained and said, I'm not going back. I came here to try and.
I would always suggest you see a specialist. We recommend Polestar Pilates people because they know what they're doing.
What kind of Pilates is that, sorry?
Polestar, Polestar. We've got 2 near me in Sussex. We use it's up to people to use. It's their decision if they want to do it, but they've been trained and some other famous Pilates people mention them too and recommend them. And I've had not good Pilates as well. So the two I know are actually hypermobile themselves, so that helps. So you went back to your question was your muscles. Hypertonia, poor muscle tone is so common.
But what exactly does that mean then? What does it
Well,
like? Or
is just weak muscles. I'm not medical.
okay.
As far as I can say, it's lack of tone. It's so you're hyper or hypo, and this is the really poor strength one. And I noticed that in so many pupils all the time. So often they're often just given not often just, but often given diagnosis of dyspraxia, and that covers it all. But I think there's more to it, possibly.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm dyspraxic.
I don't think it covers it, and I think there's a lot more needed to look at with hypermobility. So yeah, again, if you have to build it up, and our muscles and our brain need to really understand, the muscle fibers need to remember what we need to do to build that up. So and as I said, often I get muscle spasms and rigidity incredibly bad. Got a few today, but what I have to do is actually strengthen my other muscles. I know now, but you don't think that, and you're taught by some practitioners to stretch, and why aren't you stretching, and have you tried this stretch? And I can do it, no problem. It doesn't help at all, because we need to strengthen the weak parts, and that's the hard part. So I can do wonderful stretches, believe me, end of range, but some other ones I've got no strength at all. I mean, it depends on my injury at the time, but I've been in wheelchairs for quite a while, all sorts, and prone, lying for like 18 months from injuries, and then you just decondition even more. And then I don't know if I touched on the mental health actually, but it affects your mental health. You can get post-traumatic stress disorder. I meant to say that a little bit more, because you're so disbelieved, and you're in a situation, it causes a lot of issues, and you're not going to be believed, because you get that roll of eyes, like, really? How can you dislocate both shoulders by sitting in a car? Really,
it's very invalidating.
Yeah, you just feel totally disbelieved, and you go and do something else. Hence my other talk, and that's why I lost my career, and I nearly lost my life. So that's why I do this. But just remember the connective tissues throughout our body, and they haven't found the gene yet. A lot more research is needed. I don't know when they will, but a lot is linked to inflammation.
Seems to be a lot of talk about inflammation for a number of things. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Oh.
Can I carry on with my really long list?
Oh gosh. Okay.
I know. I'm just like, all the things. You made me just think about something actually, that I tend to experience what I always think of as growing pains. But obviously I'm 36, so I shouldn't be having the odd growing pain. Does that ring any bells for you? Like, I don't know how else to describe them.
Yes. Is that in a specific area, like the legs, or?
Yeah, I think it tends to be arms and legs.
Yeah. Very common with the children, teenagers. The parents say that, and I know myself, taking my youngest, it's all growing pains. They'll grow out of it, and so on. And it turns out they have severe leg problems. So my youngest does not have Ehlers Danlos, but he grew to the height of 6 foot at the age of 11 or 12, and therefore his legs and tendons weren't growing in the right place, but actually he's hypermobile in his ankles, so he can lie down or sit down with his legs straight like that, sorry like that, but actually clap his feet together. with his legs straight, and just it's one of the party tricks he loves showing off, and I keep telling him off doing it, but of course he's going to carry on. And that he wasn't believed, and I didn't know about it then, so I still feel a bit guilty about that. So both my children are hypermobile, but they're not symptomatic, if you see what I mean. So you can be hypermobile and not symptomatic. I don't know if I said that on the thing.
Well, you've said it now.
Oh, good.
Which is good.
But yeah, growing pains are very, very common, and it's one of those things that we get told a lot. And it might be growing pains, but it needs, you know, if you've got a number of symptoms. So on the diagnostic criteria for hypermobility, Ehlers Danlos, which is on that slide, and I've put the links, you can have a look at that, or the RCGP EDS toolkit. It's got all the areas you can check for, depending which one you think you are. It might not be Ehlers Danlos, it might be, as I said, the closely related hypermobility spectrum disorder. But I was diagnosed since 2015 4 different times in 4 different ways. So I've been EDS3, hypermobility, Ehlers Danlos syndrome, back to hypermobility spectrum disorder, back to hypermobility, Ehlers Danlos. And before that, I was hypermobile. And then before that, on my nose, it actually said the bendy lady.
The bendy lady. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I always, you just think of it as the bendy people kind of thing.
But it's bendy inside elastic, all tissues, you know, that blood.
But that's why it's interesting, because the other things that I listed in terms of what I experienced that just were interesting, that it is or could be indicative, is that we've already talked about my issues with fatigue. I don't have restorative sleep. Right, I have brain fog. I have dry eye. I went for years and absolute years ago to see if I could get laser eye surgery, because I didn't want to wear glasses. And they said that I couldn't because I have extremely dry eye. Like most people's tears, this is such a weird thing to know. Most people's tears are supposed to what would be the word? Most people's tears last for between, I think it's 7 to 10 seconds or something like that, whereas mine only last around 3 or 4. So I couldn't have laser surgery.
You're crying, it lasts.
No, as in just the general lubrication of your own eyes. So I have to blink more often to lubricate my eyes on a regular basis. And so I have dry eye. They said that I couldn't have the laser surgery because that is a side effect, so it would probably get worse.
Oh,
so I never got that done. So dry eye is an interesting one.
I only got it about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Just an added one. Very burning, itching, and you can get infections as well, and I have to use drops.
Yeah, I mean, touch wood, I don't need to wear drops at the moment. If I wear contact lenses, I have to, they just get stuck to my eyes basically because they just dry out so quickly. It's very unpleasant. You talked about the throat. I've always had an issue with my uvula. I actually asked if they would remove it, or so you can actually have uvularectomies or have them shortened, but they wouldn't do it.
I would ask them to look at hypermobility just in case. The dysphonia, I think it's dysphonia, so you can get issues with your vocal cords, your all that area.
Yeah,
So
and that's always frustrated me, and particularly after I've eaten, because I can feel it. Obviously, I'm very sensitive as an autistic person, so I feel it all the time. So I'm always trying to clear my throat or just being frustrated.
It might be worth looking at that. There's a very good book.
This is very interesting.
I'm going to promote this book again. I do like, and I've got another book. I'm going to promote both books. I don't know why, but I do like them. And
well, if you give me the links as well, I can pop them in the description.
Yeah, they're in the references too, but I would suggest people.
Could you actually email me, literally just copy and paste your references so I can pop them in? Because we have a notes part on Aucademy where I list references for people to go and look into the different topics. The last few things I've got on here, which they wouldn't take my wisdom teeth because they're wonky.
They took mine out, but I can tell you, I was so surprised. We have a lot of issues with teeth. They crumble, they crack, the enamel goes.
I have a crack at the
gum
front
disease. Gum disease is very common, gingivitis, and we're blamed.
And I have this wonky one.
I can't see it.
Oh, you're a bit far away probably now, but I have this wonky one, which my lip always catches on. My dentist promised it would drop further than it did, so he wouldn't give me a brace, and so I've got this tooth that's sort of started quite high.
Does anaesthesia, does the lignocaine work for you?
It does. I haven't had injections in my mouth very often.
Oh, right. I mean, it does work for me, but a lot of people say it doesn't. But only once it didn't work at all, and she had to put about 8 lots in. And the thing with general anaesthesias, it works for me, but it wears off very quickly, so they have to use a lot of it, and then my blood pressure shoots down. They get worried. I'm having an operation soon.
Yeah. Oh, well, at least hopefully that'll be on your notes. And my last thing, I mean, there's probably loads of other things that if I actually sat here and long enough, but the tender abdomen thing was interesting because I've always experienced that and I just kind of ignore it.
Yeah, I did too. I remember as a teenager, because I was quite tall and skinny, but always had a bloated stomach and felt tender. You know, some people were quite mean to me, saying, when's it due, sort of thing. Yeah, so you can get those allergies, but you can also get intolerances. And we think maybe it is a form of MCAS, mast cell activation, in the gut. And I know that's quite a big subject for a lot of people, but you know, the evidence is growing there and it seems to make sense. I've been very, very, very ill. And when you can't eat, you're scared to eat because you know the pain and the reflux and the coughing and the breathing is going to happen. You just stop eating. And I think that also, and this is my personal opinion, is an effect why a lot of people are considered anorexic. But it's actually physical pain as well. But that's my own view. It's complex, you know.
Yeah. So many things. I mean, because I think we'll have run over by a bit, which is not an issue. But have you got any final things you think people would need to know or like to hear about from you on this topic?
Just remember, it's not about just the joints dislocating or subluxating. It's throughout the body, and it's heritable. So usually there'll be someone else in the family or sibling. Usually girls and women are more affected. So both genders are affected, but we are more symptomatic, and it might be due to hormones. I think a lot more study is needed in this area. And the spectrum bias, I think, is key, that you know, we need to be aware, medical practitioners need to be aware that medically unexplained symptoms do not mean we get shoved under a mat. You know, we just get used to it, but it's not good for our health, mentally or physically. And it's just going to get bigger, so watch this space. Yeah, it's really exciting, actually.
Oh, lovely. Well, I've got all the links that you've sent me as well, and I'll get those references off you so they can go into the notes section. And so for people who are watching, so I'm talking about people who aren't here because this is past Chloe, because we had to pre-record this so that Jane could recuperate from an operation, and so Jane isn't here for the live. I don't know if you'll be in a state where you feel that you want to be in the comment section. You're welcome to, but if you're not, that's absolutely not a problem, in case anyone had any questions, but we could always just post them and keep them in the event or something. Yes. So yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You're doing a brilliant job.
Oh, well, we just keep finding people to come and talk on these topics, because, you know, that's what Harry and I have been enjoying about this, is that there's so many topics relating to being autistic and autistic experience. And if we don't know enough about it, we'll go and find somebody who does, find an autistic person who can come and do that topic for us. And it's great. We're learning loads of things. It's been really good. So I'm going to stop this recording. And thanks for listening and or watching to everybody on Aucademy.